What would you do if a starving street boy gave away his only meal only to be saved years later by the very life he once protected? Elijah Carter was only 14 years old, but life had already aged him in ways no child should ever experience. He didn't have a bed to sleep in. He didn't have a home to call his own. Most days, he didn't even have food. Elijah lived on the streets of Abuja, a loud and restless city where no one had time to notice a barefoot boy with a torn shirt and tired eyes. Every morning, he woke up on the cold pavement beneath a shuttered storefront, his back aching from the concrete, his lips dry, his stomach empty. There were no school bells in Elijah's life. Only the sound of wheels grinding against gravel, voices yelling prices in the market, and the distant honk of impatient drivers rushing past. He wore the same clothes every day, a shirt faded from too much sun, pants too short for his growing legs, and a threadbare sack slung over one shoulder. That sack was all he had. It was his lifeline. Each morning, Elijah would walk the dusty streets, searching through trash piles and gutters for plastic bottles, bent cans, and anything that might earn him a few coins. If he got lucky, a kind stranger would give him 5 naira, barely enough to buy a piece of bread. Most days, people shouted at him, "Get away from here! You're making the market smell. Go take a bath, boy." But Elijah never shouted back. He never begged twice. He just lowered his eyes, stepped away, and kept walking. There was no place for pride in his world, only survival. And yet even when his stomach growled loud enough to echo in his chest, even when he hadn't eaten for 2 days, Elijah still held on to something most people had already lost: hope. That morning the sun rose hot and unforgiving. Elijah pushed himself up from the concrete where he'd slept, stretched his sore legs, and picked up his sack. His legs felt weak. His hands trembled. Still, he walked. He searched the alleys and street corners. He dug through broken crates and flipped over discarded buckets. Eventually, he found 2 crushed bottles, 1 bent spoon, and 3 empty cans. He smiled faintly as he dropped them into his sack. "Maybe today I'll have enough for bread," he whispered. The marketplace was already buzzing, women shouting out prices, men pushing carts, children laughing, biting into fresh roasted corn. Elijah wove through the crowd, dodging carts and footsteps until he reached the first food stall. He stepped forward slowly, eyes low. "Auntie, please, do you have any leftover food?" The woman turned, eyes sharp. "You think I cook for beggars?" she snapped. Elijah stepped back without a word. He moved on, to the woman selling tomatoes, to the man frying fish, to the couple stacking loaves of bread. No one looked at him. Some waved him away. Others simply turned their heads. His stomach ached. His eyes burned. But he did not cry. He saw a group of boys eating corn near a banana stall. One of them dropped a piece. They didn't notice. They laughed and walked away. Elijah waited until they were gone, then crouched down to pick it up. He brushed off the dirt with the edge of his shirt. It didn't matter what it was. His belly needed something. But just as he raised the piece of food to his mouth, a dog ran past and snatched it from his hand. Elijah froze, then sat down beneath the wooden stall in silence. His arms wrapped tightly around his knees. "Maybe the trash will feed me today," he said softly. He got up again. Walked behind a small restaurant where food waste was dumped. The smell was strong. Flies buzzed everywhere. But to Elijah, it smelled like possibility. He dug carefully through the trash bins, lifting lids, sorting old plates. Finally, he found it, a small bowl of rice and beans. Not too dirty, not too spoiled. His heart skipped. "Thank you, God," he whispered. He took it to the pipe leaking by the wall and rinsed it off as best he could, then sat under a small tree beside the dumpster. placed his sack beside him, unwrapped the food with trembling hands, and for the first time in 2 days, he smiled. Just as he was about to lift a spoonful to his lips, he heard a sound, a soft thud, like something or someone had fallen. Elijah turned his head. Behind the dumpster, lying motionless on the ground, was a woman. Her face was drenched in sweat. Her clothes were dusty, and her hands clutched her swollen belly. She was pregnant, and she looked like she hadn't eaten in days. Elijah dropped the spoon. His heart began to race. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know her story. But in that moment, he saw her not as a stranger, but as someone who, like him, was hungry, hurting, and alone. Elijah's breath caught in his throat. The woman didn't move. She lay there behind the dumpster, barely more than a shadow, but in his eyes, she was everything. Her hands trembled as they held her stomach. Her chest rose in weak, uneven motions. Her lips were cracked. Her face, once beautiful, now worn by exhaustion and dust. Elijah dropped the spoon. His first meal in 2 days lay forgotten on the ground. He rushed to her side. Kneeling in the dirt, he reached out and gently touched her shoulder. "Ma'am," he whispered. "Are you okay?" No response. Only the shallow rise and fall of her chest. "Please," he said softly, "can you hear me?" Still nothing. Her skin was cold, her breathing shallow, and the way she clutched her belly, it scared him. Elijah glanced around. The market was still buzzing. People walked by just across the street. No one noticed. No one cared. She could have died right there, and the world would have kept moving. But Elijah wasn't going to let that happen. He looked down at the small bowl of rice and beans in his hand, his only food, the thing that had brought him hope. Then he looked back at the woman. Her belly was round, swollen but too still. He hesitated only a moment. Then he tore a corner of the plastic wrap from the food and gently lifted a spoonful to her lips. "Please," he said softly. "Just a little. You need it more than me." At first she didn't respond. But slowly trembling, her lips parted. She tasted the food, swallowed. And then tears rolled down the sides of her face. Why?" she whispered hoarsely. "Why are you helping me?" Elijah gave a faint smile. His voice cracked when he replied, "Because I know what hunger feels like. No one helped me yesterday, but I don't want your baby to suffer." The woman closed her eyes again, not from pain this time, but from the weight of his words. Tears streamed down her face. She reached for his hand. He held hers, small and shaking. Bit by bit, Elijah fed her the rice and beans. He wiped her forehead with the edge of his dirty shirt. He helped her sit up against the dumpster wall. For the first time in what felt like forever, she breathed easier. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "My name is Ava," she said. "Ava Morgan." Elijah nodded. "I'm Elijah," she smiled weakly. "Elijah, you have a good heart. I didn't think anyone still cared." She reached into the small torn bag she carried. Fingers trembling, she pulled out a folded card. It was creased, but clean. She handed it to him. "This is my business card," she whispered. "If you ever need help, find me." Elijah took the card. He couldn't read most of it, but he saw her name. Ava Morgan. He tucked it into his pocket like it was made of gold. Because in his world, this wasn't just a card. It was a spark of hope. He stood slowly, helped her to her feet. One hand clutched her belly, the other held onto him. "Thank you, Elijah," she whispered, before walking away, vanishing into the crowd. Elijah stood there for a long time, watching her go. The plate was empty. His belly still ached, but his heart felt full. Maybe, just maybe, he had done something right that day. He bent down, picked up his sack, and walked back into the noise and dust of the street. Back to the only life he knew, one of hunger and struggle and being unseen. But now, there was something new in his pocket and something stronger in his chest. Before that day behind the dumpster, before the hunger, before the dust clung to her skin and the world stopped seeing her, Ava Morgan had a life many women dreamed of. She lived in a mansion with marble floors and glass walls that caught the light just right. She had closets filled with tailored dresses, shoes in neat rows, and fresh-cut flowers delivered every week. When she entered a room, people stood. When she spoke, others fell silent. Because Ava Morgan wasn't just anyone, she was the wife of Charles Whitmore, one of the most powerful businessmen in Abuja. He owned towers, companies, vehicles with drivers who never asked questions. And for a while, Ava loved him. She truly did. Their early days were like a fairy tale. Vacations in Italy, candlelit dinners on rooftop terraces, handwritten notes tucked into her purse. They laughed. They dreamed. They built a world together. But wealth, it doesn't always grow love. Sometimes it chokes it. Charles became busier, colder, more distracted. He spent longer nights at the office and even longer days away without calling. He stopped looking at her the way he used to. He stopped asking if she was okay. And Ava, she tried. She wore the dresses he liked. She planned weekends away. She even cooked one of his favorite meals from scratch. But nothing reached him anymore. And then she found the messages. Not one, not two, hundreds. Photos, calls in the middle of the night, reservations made under different names. And the worst part, it wasn't just another woman. It was a whole other family in another city. A secret life Charles had built with someone else. When she confronted him, her voice shaking, tears filling her eyes, he didn't flinch. He didn't lie. He didn't explain. He simply said, "I am a man of many needs. If you don't like it, leave." And just like that, she became disposable. Ava stood in the doorway of their bedroom, 2 months pregnant, staring at the man she once loved. And he turned back to his laptop, as if she were just a maid who had overstayed her welcome. She left that night. Not because she had a plan, not because she was brave, but because her soul was breaking and staying would have finished the job. She packed a small handbag, some cash, one change of clothes, an ultrasound photo, and she walked away from a world of privilege into one that didn't care if she lived or died. Her bank account was frozen within hours. Her phone disconnected. No driver, no guards. No friends who dared to help. She had once been Mrs. Whitmore. Now she was just Ava. She moved from shelter to shelter, then to sidewalks, then nowhere at all. Her body weakened. She ate less and less. Her belly grew heavier, but her hands stayed empty. The days blurred. Sometimes she counted passing buses just to distract herself from hunger. Other times, she closed her eyes and imagined herself back at that rooftop dinner, the night he told her she was the most beautiful woman in the city. That night now felt like someone else's life. Then came the afternoon that nearly ended everything. It was too hot. She was too tired, and her legs couldn't carry her any further. She collapsed behind a restaurant, face first into gravel, her hand wrapped protectively around her unborn child. People passed. No one stopped. And then Elijah appeared, a boy with nothing. No shoes, no food, no place to go. But somehow, with more heart than all the men she had ever known, he fed her, spoke to her kindly, treated her like she mattered when she was sure the world had forgotten her. He called her Mom, held her hand, and told her he didn't want her baby to suffer. That was the first time she had cried in days, not because of pain, but because someone saw her. A homeless boy, a stranger, but somehow her first real lifeline. And now, As she walked away from him that day, with rice still clinging to her lips and tears on her cheeks, she knew something had shifted. She didn't know how or when. But Ava Morgan vowed to herself, if I ever get back on my feet, I will never forget that boy. And one day, I will repay this moment, no matter what it takes. Elijah sat beneath the dusty tree behind the restaurant, his back pressed against the wall, his stomach tight with hunger, and his hands shaking from exhaustion. The bowl in front of him was now empty. The rice and beans were gone, every last grain fed to a woman whose name he had just learned. Ava Morgan. She had disappeared into the crowd, her hand on her swollen belly, her steps slow but steady. She never looked back. But Elijah wasn't angry. He didn't regret it. He just sat. His stomach was still hollow, but for the first time in a long while, his heart wasn't. He looked at the dirty plastic plate beside him, then at his old sack filled with crushed bottles and bent cans. He sighed, stood up, and picked everything up as if he were lifting the weight of the world. Back to it, he whispered. The market noise returned like static. Vendors shouted, carts rolled by. The smell of grilled meat teased his senses. But Elijah didn't stop. He walked. One step, then another, then another. The rest of the day passed like a blur. He dug through bins, picked through gutters, collected just enough recyclables to earn a few coins from the man near the scrapyard. When the sun began to fall, he bought a tiny bread roll from a street vendor. It was dry and stale, but it was his. He took one bite, then stopped. Across the street, a stray dog sat in the shadows. Its ribs showed through its fur, its tongue hung loose, and its eyes, they looked just like his. Hungry, tired, forgotten. Elijah tore the bread in half and tossed one piece gently across the street. The dog hesitated, then limped forward and ate. That night, Elijah found a spot under the bridge he called home. It was cold, and the cement was as unforgiving as ever. But the air was quiet. He leaned back, arms wrapped around his sack, and for the first time in a while, he felt something he couldn't name. Not happiness, not peace, but something softer than pain. Maybe pride. He didn't have much, but he had done something good. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded business card. It was creased from sweat and movement, but the name was still there. Ava Morgan. He traced the letters with his thumb, even though he couldn't read the address below it. He didn't know where she went. He didn't know if he'd ever see her again. But the card felt like a seed in dry soil, a promise, a possibility. Elijah held it close to his chest, closed his eyes, and drifted into a sleep filled with dreams he hadn't allowed himself in years. Dreams where he wasn't just the bottle boy. Dreams where someone knew his name. Dreams where he had a purpose. The next few weeks passed in routine. Same streets, same bins, same hunger. But Elijah kept going, because now he had a reason. He began giving names to the dogs he shared scraps with. He started greeting the fruit vendor who always ignored him. He even gave part of a sandwich to a boy smaller than him who was crying by the curb. Something had changed. The world hadn't softened, but maybe Elijah had grown stronger. Still, he never used the card. He didn't want to waste it. He didn't even know how, but just carrying it was enough. It reminded him that he wasn't invisible. That one act of kindness had created a memory strong enough to outlast hunger. And maybe, just maybe, he had left a mark on someone. One evening, as he sat by the street lamp near the scrapyard, he overheard two men talking. "Did you hear?" one said. "Charles Whitmore's wife vanished months ago. They say she walked out pregnant, took nothing. Not even her driver." "Crazy," the other man muttered. "Can't believe a woman would give all that up." Elijah blinked. Charles Whitmore. The name sounded familiar. He'd heard it before on billboards, in headlines blowing across the sidewalk, but now he realized that was her, Ava. She had once been someone important. Someone with power, with money, with status. And yet she had collapsed beside a dumpster, starving and alone just like him. No one is untouchable, he thought. The world has a way of leveling everyone. That night, Elijah sat under the bridge again. He held the card, looked up at the stars barely peeking through the city lights, and whispered, "If I ever see you again, I'll tell you thank you too." Because in giving away his only meal, he had gained something no one could ever steal. A piece of himself he thought he had lost. The part that still believed in people. The part that refused to disappear. By the time Ava Morgan walked away from that back alley, her stomach slightly fuller, her heart unexpectedly touched. She wasn't just surviving. She was remembering who she used to be. Because before the hunger, before the bruised feet and trembling hands, before Elijah fed her the only food he had, Ava had lived a very different life. She had been the wife of Charles Whitmore. Yes, that Charles Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Global Holdings. Real estate mogul, luxury developer. A man who could turn dust into gold with the flick of a pen. Their marriage had been a showpiece, glamorous events, magazine covers, her smile, always perfectly placed, his arm always tightly wrapped around her waist like she was a prized possession. And in the beginning, it had felt like love, real love. He was charming, magnetic, a man who could make a room pause with just his voice. When he asked Ava to marry him, he didn't kneel. He flew her to Santorini. At sunset, with a ring so large it caught the sun and tossed it back, she said yes. Of course she did. They lived in a high-rise penthouse with walls of glass and floors of white marble. She had a driver, a stylist, and a personal chef who knew her favorite tea. Her days were filled with gallery events, charity lunches, and brand meetings. She wasn't just Ava, she was Mrs. Whitmore. But behind the glass and glamour, cracks had begun to form. At first, it was subtle. Charles started working later. He answered her questions with nods. He skipped dinners first, once a week, then more. Then came the excuses. The business trips, the unanswered texts. Ava noticed. Of course she did, but she had learned early that in their world, raising concerns made you look insecure, or worse, inconvenient. She played her part, smiled in public, waited in silence. Until the night she followed him. She wasn't proud of it, she hated herself for doing it. But something in her heart needed truth more than peace, and truth hit her like a freight train. Another apartment. Another woman, another life, not a fling. Not a one-time betrayal, a full-blown secret family in another city, with a child. She confronted him that night. He didn't deny it, didn't explain, didn't apologize. He sipped his whiskey, looked her straight in the eye and said, "I'm a man of many needs. If you don't like it, you can leave." That was it. No begging, no regret, just a door left wide open. Ava was 2 months pregnant, and in that moment she knew exactly what kind of father this man would be. She packed a small bag. Her phone, some cash, the first ultrasound photo. She left before sunrise. No driver, no security detail. No trace. At first she tried to call friends. Most didn't answer. The few who did, their voices were cold. She's the one who left him. That's all it took for doors to close. Her bank accounts were frozen within 48 hours, her phone disconnected, her name erased like a typo from a press release. For days Ava wandered. She slept on benches, ate nothing. Spoke to no one. The woman who had once walked red carpets was now walking alleys in shoes that didn't fit and clothes that smelled of rain and fear. She tried going to a shelter. It was full. She tried asking for help. People looked through her. Even the guards who once opened doors for her now looked away. By the end of the first week, she was hallucinating. Her baby kicked, but she couldn't find food. Couldn't find water. Couldn't find herself. Then came the afternoon behind the restaurant. She had barely made it halfway down the alley before her knees buckled. Her arms wrapped protectively around her stomach as she collapsed beside the dumpster. And for the first time, she thought it was over. She closed her eyes not to rest but to give in. And then, a voice. Soft. Young. Shaky. "Mom, are you okay, Elijah?" The boy with bare feet, a sack of metal cans, and eyes filled with more kindness than anyone she'd met in years. He fed her. He stayed beside her. He treated her like a human being. And when she walked away that day, it wasn't just food that had kept her alive. It was the reminder that someone still saw her. That compassion didn't come from wealth, it came from heart. She clutched her belly that night, curled up in a quiet alley, and whispered to her unborn child, "I don't know who he is, but he gave us a chance to survive. And I promise you, if I live through this, I will become someone worthy of that moment." She didn't know how. She didn't know when. But Ava Morgan wasn't done yet. Years passed, and the world didn't pause for Elijah Carter. He grew taller. His voice deepened, his shoulders broadened, but life stayed the same. He still woke up beneath the bridge, still collected bottles and rusted cans, still carried the same sack over his shoulder. Some days were better, he'd make enough for a small plate of beans and bread. Other days he'd go to bed with nothing but hunger and hope keeping him alive. But Elijah never turned bitter, never hardened. He still smiled at little kids chasing tires down the street. Still shared leftovers with stray dogs. Still picked flowers from cracks in the pavement, even if they wilted by nightfall. And deep in his pocket in the same spot, every day he carried a bent business card. The name on it had faded with time, but Elijah didn't need to read it anymore. He knew what it said. Ava Morgan. He had never called the number, never knocked on any doors, but that card, it was his anchor. His reminder that once someone had promised him a different ending, and that maybe, just maybe, there was still one waiting. It was a Monday afternoon. The sun was burning. The streets of Abuja buzzed like they always did, horns blaring, vendors shouting, buses weaving dangerously. Elijah was crossing a busy road, his sack full of scrap metal weighing him down. He spotted a pile of recyclables on the far side. Valuable. Enough to maybe eat for 2 days. He looked left, then right. Clear. He stepped forward carefully, one foot, then the other. Then screech. A blaring horn, a flash of silver. A car came flying around the corner, too fast, too close. Too late. The impact hit like thunder. Elijah's body lifted from the ground, his sack bursting open, bottles and cans raining around him like broken stars. He landed hard. His head struck the pavement. His body lay still on the hot tarmac. The street froze. Gasps, shouts. Phones raised. "He's not moving. That's the bottle boy, isn't it? Someone call for help." Blood spread beneath him. His chest barely moved. His lips were parted, like he was trying to speak, but no sound came. A taxi driver jumped from his vehicle, lifted Elijah gently, and raced him to the nearest hospital. Hopewell Medical Center. Clean white walls, the scent of antiseptic and urgency. Doctors rushed to the ER. Head trauma. Possible internal bleeding. Get the crash cart ready. And then a nurse walked into the room. She had kind eyes, calm hands. A voice that once pleaded for food beside a dumpster. Her name tag read, Ava Morgan. The moment she saw the boy on the stretcher, her breath caught, Her knees weakened, and the world fell silent. She stepped closer. The face was different, older, bruised, bloodied, but she knew him. "Please," she said to the attending physician, "don't give him to anyone else. I'll take care of him myself." The doctor nodded, surprised, but respectful. "Is he family?" She looked down at Elijah, unconscious, battered, and whispered, "No, but he saved my life once, and now I'll save his." Hours passed. Elijah lay connected to machines. Tubes ran into his arm, bandages wrapped around his head and chest. He didn't wake, didn't stir, but Ava never left his side. She wiped the sweat from his brow, held his hand gently, whispered his name like a prayer. "You don't know who I've become, Elijah," she said through quiet tears. "But I never forgot what you did. You gave me your only meal, and you gave my daughter a chance to be born. Now I'm going to give you a second chance at life." Days turned into nights. Other nurses rotated shifts, doctors came and went, but Ava stayed. Every break, every spare moment, she was there, sitting by his side like a mother guarding a child. The staff began to notice. "Is he your son?" one asked. "No," she replied. "He's not my son, not my brother. Not my husband. But he's the reason I'm alive today." On the 5th morning, just as the first rays of sunlight poured into the ICU room, Elijah's fingers twitched. Ava was wiping his face with a damp cloth when she saw it. She froze, then leaned closer. "Elijah?" His eyes blinked. Once, twice, then slowly he opened them. They searched the ceiling, the machines, the tubes. Then finally they found her face. Where am I?" he whispered, barely audible. "You're in a hospital," Ava said softly. "You're safe now." He looked at her, confused, but there was something in her voice, something familiar. His brows furrowed. "I know you. You were the woman behind the dumpster." Ava nodded. Tears filled her eyes. "Yes. And you gave me food when you had nothing." His lips trembled. A tear rolled down his cheek. "For the first time, someone came back for me." Ava smiled gently. "You're not alone anymore, Elijah. Just rest. I'll take care of everything now." And for the first time in years, Elijah closed his eyes not from pain, but from peace. Elijah Carter lay in the hospital bed, a pale sheet pulled to his chest, his face calm, his breathing finally steady. Machines beeped beside him, gentle reminders that life was still holding on. His head was bandaged. His ribs had been cracked, his body bruised and broken, but his soul, for the first time in years, was safe. And sitting beside him, in a wrinkled white uniform stained with sleepless nights, was Ava Morgan. She hadn't left the room since he woke up. Not once. Each morning, Ava arrived before the other nurses. She would adjust his IV, check his vitals, and whisper, "Good morning, Elijah. You're doing better today." And even though he couldn't always answer, he would nod. Just slightly, just enough. She brought him hot soup in real bowls. Not trays, not plastic. She fed him slowly, patiently, like she had once been fed. When his hands trembled, she steadied them. When his voice cracked, she waited. She combed his hair, wiped his face, sat by his side, even when her shift ended. The other nurses watched quietly. They whispered in the hallway. Some thought she was his mother. Others assumed she was paying off a debt. But when asked directly, Ava simply smiled and said, "He once gave me his only meal, and with it, he saved 2 lives." One night, as the hospital lights dimmed and the hallways fell into a soft hush, Elijah opened his eyes wide for the first time. The medication had worn off, his mind finally clear. He turned to Ava, his voice faint but firm. "You're her, aren't you?"
She looked up from her book. Her who? The woman behind the dumpster, the one I gave the rice to. Ava smiled gently. Yes, that was me. He blinked, trying to sit up, but the pain still held him down. I thought, maybe it was a dream. No, Elijah, she said softly. You saved me that day. I was pregnant, alone, and ready to give up. But you gave me your food, your kindness, and hope. His eyes welled up with tears. He turned away, ashamed. I didn't have anything. I still don't. She reached for his hand, held it tightly. You gave more than most people ever do, and now it's my turn. Elijah's healing wasn't fast, but it was steady. The bruises faded, his ribs knitted back together, his strength returned, but more than that, his spirit did. He began to laugh again softly at first, then more often. He asked questions. Talked about the dogs he used to feed, about the kids he saw playing soccer near the scrapyard. He even joked that hospital food wasn't as bad as the dumpsters. Ava chuckled every time. One morning, the head doctor stopped by. He tapped the edge of Elijah's chart and looked at him seriously. You're recovering well, he said. In a few days, you'll be ready to go. Elijah nodded slowly, but then his eyes lowered. His hands, thin and scarred, rested in his lap. Go where? He whispered. I don't have a home. The room went silent. Ava stood in the corner, arms crossed, her heart thudding. She walked forward, knelt beside the bed and met his eyes. You don't have to go back to the street, she said. Not this time. He looked at her, confused. What do you mean? I mean, she said, you're coming home with me. That evening, the discharge papers were signed. Elijah walked with a slight limp, but his steps were stronger than the boy who had once collapsed in traffic. Ava called a small taxi. No limo, no fanfare. Just two people with history between them and hope ahead. They passed the busy roads, the towers of glass, the places where Elijah once slept on benches and beneath bridges, and finally they arrived. A quiet apartment complex, nothing fancy, but clean. Safe, warm, there were flowers by the windows. Children's chalk drawings on the sidewalk, laughter floating from balconies. Ava led him inside. The apartment smelled of cinnamon and rice. A small table sat in the kitchen. Family photos lined the hallway. And then a little girl ran into the room. She had curly hair, wide, curious eyes, and bare feet thumping across the tile. Mummy, who's that? She asked, peeking from behind Ava's legs. Ava knelt beside her. This, she said softly, is Elijah. A long time ago, before you were born, Elijah gave me food and saved your life. The girl looked up at him, eyes wide. Thank you, she whispered. Then without hesitation she hugged him. Elijah's arms shook, his heart pounded. He hadn't been hugged in years, maybe ever. Ava stood behind them, tears in her eyes. I named her Sophie, she said. It means wisdom. She's alive today because of you. Elijah didn't have words, only tears. That night, he slept in a real bed, under a real roof, with a blanket and a full belly. And for the first time since he could remember, Elijah didn't fall asleep out of exhaustion. He fell asleep in peace. Elijah Carter awoke to a sound he hadn't heard in years, quiet. No footsteps rushing past his head, no shouting vendors. No sirens in the distance, just the soft whir of a ceiling fan, the chirp of birds outside the window, and the faint clinking of breakfast dishes from the kitchen. He blinked slowly, adjusting to the light pouring through pale curtains. The bed beneath him was soft, the sheets were clean. His pillow smelled like lavender and soap. For a long moment he just stared at the ceiling, breathing in. This wasn't a dream. He wasn't under a bridge. He wasn't curled against a wall behind the market. He was in a home. A real home. Ava tapped gently on the doorframe. "Morning, Elijah," she said, her voice warm. He sat up, startled, instinctively pulling the blanket tighter. "I made rice and eggs," she added, "and Sophie's waiting to see if you'll help her with her puzzles again." Elijah's mouth curled into a smile. She didn't say it like he was a guest, she said it like he belonged. The days settled into a gentle rhythm. Each morning, Ava would head to work at Hopewell Medical Center. Sophie would hum to herself as she packed her tiny backpack. And Elijah, he would help with breakfast, clean up the table, and walk Sophie to her school bus. At first, it felt strange. His hands weren't used to holding clean dishes. His feet weren't used to tiled floors. But he learned. He learned how to fold laundry, how to sweep a kitchen properly, how to make Sophie's favorite snack peanut butter with banana slices cut into stars. Most importantly, he learned how to laugh again. Every afternoon, when Ava returned home, she found Elijah reading. Not fluently, but slowly, patiently. He used Sophie's school books, spelling cards, even her alphabet fridge magnets. One evening, he traced the letters of his name across a notebook. Elijah. Ava stood behind him, smiling. "You're doing it," she whispered. "I never thought I'd be the one holding a pencil again," he said. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You're not the same boy I met that day behind the dumpster," she said. "You're stronger now. And smarter, and you deserve everything good that comes next." But even as the weeks passed, a quiet question sat heavy in Elijah's heart. What next? He was grateful, beyond words. But he knew he couldn't stay forever just folding clothes and helping with homework. He wanted more. He wanted to become someone. One morning over tea, Ava noticed his silence. "You're thinking again," she said. He nodded. "I want to do something, earn my way, build something of my own." She smiled not with surprise, but with quiet pride. "I spoke to a friend," she said. "She manages a recycling company nearby. They're looking for someone to help sort materials, someone honest, hardworking." Elijah looked up, eyes wide. "A real job?" he asked, almost afraid to believe it. "Yes," she said. "And it starts next week if you want it." He nodded slowly, then faster, then stood up suddenly, knocking over his cup by accident. "I'm sorry," he started, but Ava just laughed. "It's okay," she said. "It's just tea. But you're starting a new chapter." The week passed quickly. Ava helped him pick out clothes for work. Sophie braided his hair in her clumsy 6-year-old way, and Elijah practiced how to introduce himself in the mirror. On his first day, he woke up before the sun. He dressed neatly, double-checked everything twice, and stood by the door as the city outside slowly lit up. Ava handed him a packed lunch. Sophie handed him a crayon drawing stick figures labeled Us. He took both. And with tears in his eyes, he stepped outside. For the first time, not as a stray, not as the bottle boy, but as Elijah, a young man with a name, a purpose, and a future. The recycling center was busy, noisy, hot. But Elijah didn't mind. He sorted glass from plastic, metal from paper. He worked with focus, with care. The supervisor nodded in approval. "You've got good hands," she said. Fast, respectful. By the end of the week, he was officially on the payroll. His first paycheck was modest, but when he held it, it felt heavier than gold. He didn't spend it on himself. Instead, he brought home fresh fruit, bought Sophie a storybook, and surprised Ava with flowers from the corner stand. That night, over dinner, Ava looked at him, her voice soft, careful. "You know," she said, "when you gave me that meal, you didn't just save me. You gave me the strength to become someone new, and now I see you doing the same." Elijah swallowed hard. He looked at her, then at Sophie, then down at his hands once calloused from digging through trash,
now strong from honest work. "You didn't just save my life," he said.
"You gave me something I never had before." He paused. "A place to call home." Elijah Carter woke up before dawn, not because of cold concrete under his back, not because of hunger gnawing at his belly, but because he had a job to go to, a purpose.
He sat at the edge of his bed, watching the sky turn from charcoal to soft grey. Beside him lay clean work clothes, folded the night before. A small paper lunch bag sat waiting on the table. Ava always packed his favourites: rice, grilled vegetables, and one sweet thing Sophie would sneak in when her mum wasn't looking. Elijah smiled. That quiet life. It was everything he'd never dared to want. He still remembered the streets. He passed them every day on his walk to the recycling centre. He saw the same corners he used to sleep on, the same dumpsters he used to dig through, the same people who once looked right through him. But now they nodded, some even greeted him. "Morning. Heading to work?" It was strange. The same face, the same body, but respect came when clothes changed, when posture changed, when hope returned to your eyes. At the centre, Elijah became known for his reliability. He never arrived late. Never left a task unfinished. He worked with focus and never complained. Within 2 months, his supervisor promoted him to oversee new workers. "Elijah's got something special," she told the team, "not just Hans' heart." And Elijah, still soft-spoken, still humble, just nodded and kept working. In the evenings, he came home to laughter. Sophie would be dancing to music in the living room, barefoot and full of joy. Ava would be in the kitchen, stirring something warm on the stove. "Welcome home," she'd say. Those 2 words, they hit deeper than any paycheck ever could. They reminded Elijah that he didn't just live somewhere now. He belonged somewhere. One night, as he helped Sophie with her spelling homework, she looked up and asked, "Will you always live with us?" He hesitated, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know if he should. Ava glanced up from the sink, listening. Elijah smiled at Sophie. "For as long as I'm welcome," he said. The little girl stood up, walked over, and wrapped her arms around his waist. "You'll always be welcome," she whispered. Ava turned away to hide the tears in her eyes. Later that night, when Sophie was asleep, Ava and Elijah sat on the balcony. The night was cool. The stars were out. The city hummed below them. Ava spoke first. "I've been thinking," she said gently. Elijah waited. "You've come so far. And I see the way Sophie looks at you. She sees more than just a guest. She sees someone safe. Someone steady." He looked down, unsure of what to say. Ava continued, "You've given her something I couldn't do alone." "A father figure," Elijah's breath caught. "I'm not," he started. She raised her hand. "I know you're not her father, but you've become family. And I wanted you to know that's how we see you." He didn't respond with words. Instead, he reached into his pocket, the same pocket he'd used for years, and pulled out something old, worn, and soft at the edges. Ava's business card. He held it in his palm, offering it to her. "I never used it," he said. "Not once, but I kept it every day." Ava took the card, eyes welling with tears. "I never forgot that day," she whispered. "You saved me when I was worth nothing. Now I get to watch you become everything." From that night on, things changed. Not in dramatic ways, not with headlines or announcements, but in quiet ways. Sophie started calling him Uncle Elijah more often. Ava added his name to the mailbox. And every Sunday, they sat down at the table together for dinner, not as a nurse, a stranger, and a little girl, but as a family. Months passed. Elijah enrolled in night classes. He studied reading, basic math, and even business skills. He started dreaming bigger. One day, while walking home, he noticed an abandoned warehouse near the market. He stopped, stared through the broken windows, and whispered, "Maybe this could be something." The dream had started. He wanted to open a recycling center of his own, one that hired kids like he once was. Gave them dignity, a path forward, a second chance. Just like he'd been given. At home, Ava supported the idea instantly. She helped him build a savings plan, researched permits, even introduced him to a mentor at her hospital who had run non-profits. Together, they mapped out something more than just business. They mapped out a legacy. One night, as Elijah stood on the small balcony, he looked out at the city lights. The same city that once swallowed him whole. The same city that now knew his name. Ava joined him, cup of tea in hand. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The old life?" He shook his head. "I don't miss the street, but I remember it. Every day. It reminds me not to take this for granted." She nodded. "I do too," she said. "I remember the hunger, the fear, the moment you fed me." He turned to her. "And now look at us," he whispered. "Not just alive, but building something." She smiled. "You were never just a bottle boy, Elijah. You were always more. The world just needed time to see it." It was early morning, the kind of morning where the air felt gentle, where sunlight streamed through kitchen windows like hope, where the clink of plates and the smell of fresh bread made a house feel like home. Elijah Carter stood at the stove, stirring scrambled eggs, while Sophie set the table, carefully placing napkins like they were fine linens. Ava brewed coffee in her favorite chipped mug. It had been 2 years since that crash. 2 years since Elijah lay broken on the hot asphalt, unconscious, forgotten. Now he stood tall, healthy, strong, and most importantly found. After breakfast, he walked Sophie to the school bus. She hugged him at the corner like always, then hopped up the steps with her wild curls bouncing. Elijah stood for a moment, watching the bus disappear, remembering the days he had no one to wave goodbye to. He returned to the apartment, tied his boots, and grabbed his small backpack. Today wasn't just another shift at the recycling center. Today was the grand opening. Over the past year, with Ava's support and mentorship, Elijah had made his dream a reality. A small, community-run recycling hub, one that didn't just collect scrap, but hired street kids, taught them basic job skills, fed them, listened to them. He named it Second Chance Recyclers. The sign out front was simple, painted by local kids. The logo was a pair of hands, one offering, one receiving. The center wasn't fancy. It didn't need to be. It was real. The ribbon cutting was modest, no press. No flashy donors, just the people who mattered. Ava, Sophie, a few workers from the original recycling center, local parents, and 3 young boys, barefoot and uncertain, already hired for part-time work. Elijah stood at the front with a small speech in hand, but he never read it. Instead, he looked at the crowd and spoke from the place that had carried him through the darkest nights. "There was a time," he began, "when I slept under bridges, when I searched trash for food, when people crossed the street just to avoid looking at me." He paused. "But one day I met someone who was hurting too, and I gave her the only meal I had." He glanced at Ava. "She said I saved her, but really she saved me." The crowd stood silent, hearts in their throats. "This place," he continued, "is for kids like I was. For the ones people forget, for the ones who need someone to believe in them just once." Applause broke through the quiet. Ava wiped tears from her cheek. Sophie clapped like the world depended on it. Elijah cut the ribbon, and just like that, a new chapter began. That evening, as twilight settled, Elijah, Ava, and Sophie sat outside their apartment, watching the stars blink into place. Sophie curled up beside Elijah with a book in her lap. "Can you read to me?" she asked. He smiled. Once he couldn't even read a street sign. Now he read bedtime stories.
He began. Once upon a time. She rested her head on his arm. Ava leaned back in her chair, smiling. Halfway through the story, Sophie looked up. Did I ever tell you what my teacher said? Elijah shook his head. She asked me to draw my family. And I drew you. She said, Is he your uncle? And I said, No, that's Elijah. He saved me before I was even born. His voice caught in his throat. Ava reached across, took his hand. You'll always be part of this family, she said. Not because of blood, because of heart. Later that night, as Elijah tidied the living room, he found something in an old drawer. His first pay stub. Torn at the edges, barely legible, but he'd kept it like a trophy. Next to it, still tucked inside a folded napkin, was Ava's original business card. Faded, bent, but there. He held it in his hand, then placed it gently in a small frame on the shelf. A reminder of the moment everything changed. Of the boy he used to be, and the man he had become. 1 week later, something unexpected happened. A journalist from a local paper had heard about the new recycling center. She showed up unannounced, asked a few questions, then returned a few days later with a headline that read, Former street boy builds future for kids forgotten by the city. The article went viral. Donors called. Volunteers came forward. Other neighborhoods asked how to build the same. Elijah didn't care about the fame, but he cared about the reach. If one more kid could get off the street, if one more heart could feel seen, it was worth everything. And so the story came full circle. The boy who once fed a stranger behind a dumpster now fed an entire community with hope. The woman who had been left with nothing became the woman who gave everything. And the little girl born into uncertainty grew up in a house filled with quiet strength, unspoken love, and two people who'd saved each other long before they knew what they were doing. So if you ever doubt the power of kindness, remember Elijah Carter. He had nothing, but he gave anyway. And because of that, everything changed. Not overnight, not magically, but with time, grace, and the willingness to never stop believing. In a world that often overlooks the poor, the forgotten, and the broken, this story reminds us that dignity isn't tied to wealth, it's revealed in kindness. A barefoot boy with nothing to his name gave away his only meal to a pregnant woman collapsed behind a dumpster. He didn't do it for recognition. He didn't know her name. He simply saw someone who was suffering and he chose to act. Years later, when he lay broken and bleeding, it was that same woman, now a nurse, who saved his life. There's a lesson here, not just about charity, but about connection. One small act of compassion can echo across years. One moment of grace can come back full circle, often when we need it most. For those of us who've lived long enough to see life's highs and lows, this story is a reminder. Never underestimate the impact of simple goodness. What you give today may one day save you or someone you love in ways you could never imagine.